My name is Hazel Millisham and this is the Light on Leeds podcast, all about the wonderful city of Leeds and the great people who are doing brilliant things here. This week I have Stephen Burt, who has come to tell me about a book that he's written called The Remarkable History of Hunslet. Steve is just an absolute font of information about Leeds and its past. It's fascinating because there are so many links to today. I first came across him through Leeds Civic Trust. He was doing a talk. You can check out their YouTube page where they have recordings of all the previous talks. And if you're like me and you're obsessed about Leeds and you love history, then it's just a great resource. Have a listen to Steve tell me all about the remarkable story of Hunslet. On this week's episode of the Light on Leeds podcast, I have Steve Burt come to speak to me. Hello, Steve.
Good morning.
Very nice to speak to you indeed. So you have written a book called The Remarkable Story of Hunslet, which I had the honour of listening to when you did a talk for the Civic Trust. Can you tell me a little bit about what is so remarkable about the story of Hunslet?
Hunslet is one of those places which was one of the first industrial settlements in the world. And the fact of the matter is that you had so many industries there whose products went across the world, from Chile to China, from Australia, right the way through to Europe and up to Russia. And those products were brilliantly made, brilliantly engineered and brilliantly manufactured. And the thing is, you had so many skilled people there that were proud of the products that they made.
Yes, definitely. And so what were some of the products that were coming out of Hunslet?
Well, apart from the locomotives that many people know about, there were things like the famous Hudson Bay blankets, which were sold to the Indians in North America and Canada. And these were of such high quality that they sold in vast numbers. And in actual fact, one of the great manufacturers of woolen cloth in Hunslet, a man called Pym Nevans, he was a Quaker, an Irishman who'd settled in Leeds, which was famed for the quality of his cloth. And he was very much involved in the trade with these Indians, particularly the Seneca Indians, who were in an area of North America that we now know as New York. And such was the bond between them that he invited the chieftains across to stay with him in his house called Larchfield in Hunslet. And they came across here and explained just how badly treated they were in North America. And he travelled over there and with his Quaker connections tried to improve people's attitudes to the Native Americans. Now, this is at the beginning of the 19th century. What a forward-looking man was he?
Yeah, definitely 100%. It would be amazing to find out what the Indians thought of Leeds when they came.
Absolutely was. Unfortunately, they didn't at this time have any written histories that I could go into, but I agree. It'd be wonderful to know what they thought. But they must have thought a lot about the man for them to actually get on a boat and travel that huge distance to come and see him in Hunslet.
Yeah, absolutely must have done, yeah, and built up a relationship of trust with him.
That's right. He was a great man of honour, and he made cloth which was of the finest quality, but unfortunately he was encouraged to produce yet more of this cloth, and during the cost cutting, I think, must have gone on, the quality diminished, and sadly the gentleman went bust in the end. But when he died, the streets of Hunslet were lined on both sides for people paying their respects to a man who was an exemplar employer at the time.
Oh, that's amazing. It's good to hear. And was there a reason why Hunslet was particularly such a great place for all of this industry and production? Was it to do with its geographical location?
Well, its geographical location is great because it's by a river of soft water, which was great for processing. But I think the key element was the beds of coal that ran right under from Beeston through Hunslet and out to Middleton. And just as today we're heavily dependent on oil, at that stage everything was heavily dependent on coal. And because it was so efficiently mined, Leeds coal, Middleton coal, was so cheap that it could be used effectively in the to power the steam engines, which of course was this new technology. And I think what we forget today is that in late George and early Victorian period, it was like the Silicon Valley of America today, with those cutting edge technologies, everything from the finest machinery for making yarn and cloth, right the way through to these truly sensational steam locomotives, which transformed transport and made goods shift so speedily from the place of manufacture to the markets.
So it was just a perfect place for this huge boom.
It was, and not only did you have people who were local getting involved, like Robert Busk, who was born and bred in Leeds. He's the man that travels out to Russia in the early part of the 19th century to get flax, which is then brought up the Aire and Calder navigation from Russia, and it's there that he encourages the sale of this to people like John Marshall, who go on to make, in today's terms, billions of pounds out of making flax yarn.
Ah, right. So, and that's where Marshall's Mill comes in.
It is indeed, yeah.
And it's Marshall's Mill, isn't it? That it used to be the largest room in the world.
Yeah, all those great facts and figures, the temple works based on the Egyptian temple at Edfu, is one of the great buildings of Leeds. It is truly fantastic. But the flax spinning wasn't just going on there, it was going on in Hunslet, the Hunslet mills, the Victoria mills there. And again, when you're looking at employment, these mills are employing literally hundreds and hundreds of people in these production processes. How many businesses today, for example, employ hundreds and hundreds on one site? There are very few. But of course, you get this vast influx of people trying to get employment. And rather than be poor in the countryside and labouring on the fields where they're struggling to make a living, they'd much rather to come to places like Hunslet to try and get a job, which at least if you get here, you're getting regular hours and you're getting regular money, except at times, of course, when industry isn't doing well. But the population of Hunslet in 1775 is only 3,825 people. And yet, just over 75 years later, it's just short of 20,000. 1850, it's bigger than Dewsbury, Pontefract, Wetherby, and Barnsley. That's just Hunslet. And it's challenging the size of Wakefield, Huddersfield, and Halifax. So, this is really boom time Hunslet.
And that sort of explosion, and like you say, employers, employing like hundreds of people, and I imagine family members and things like that. Did that then break out into sort of an infrastructure of, were there schools and I'm sure there were differences, but did we have employers who really cared about the welfare of the workers?
The people like Nevins were exemplary, and they really did their best to ensure that their workforce got the best working conditions and the best money. But of course, what you have is all these people are crowding in, trying to find a place to live. Is you've got builders literally throwing up houses at a great rate of knots, and people actually, how should we put it, surviving in conditions which normally you really wouldn't have tolerated. But the housing can be really awful. Why we're fortunate is that a man called John Killingbeck, who was born and bred in Lake George and Hunslet, he actually started to write a history of the place towards the end of his life, between about 1893 and 1900 when he died. Unfortunately, it was never published, but he left us his huge archive of material, and including descriptions of the houses that he knew. And this one, I just love it. He writes, many of the houses were back to back and generally very small, regardless of the number in the family. We knew many instances where it was common for 6, 8, or 10 to occupy a single bedroom. The
Gosh.
large common open midden toilet with a closet for a dozen or more families, it polluted the air. Every street, alley, yard, and fold, as they were called, had its open, nasty, filthy gutter, wide or narrow, and in many streets, two or one on each side. Now,
Wow, you can't even imagine that, can you?
no. I mean, he witnessed this boom time where literally housing's been thrown up. There are no proper toilets, no water. It really, apart from well water, it was bad. It was serious. And of course, what do you expect with that? I mean, we're all going through COVID at the moment and we are utterly drained by this experience. But, that's exactly what they had to put up with, but a different form of threat, and it was cholera. And in 1832, cholera hit hard at Hunslet, and it's hardly surprising that you have that. But it wasn't alone. Holbeck, Leeds, all these places where you have close compacted houses, people living cheek by jowl, with these shocking living conditions, it's hardly surprising it spread. But at the time, just as we didn't understand COVID properly at the start, they didn't understand what was causing cholera, and they thought it was this miasma, this noxious bad air which was in the atmosphere, and it was caused by rotting materials like this filth that you were finding in the yards there. But the sadness was, what do you do about this? And one of the things we forget today is that in Hunslet, in that period, you had some very, very wealthy people living there. People like Joshua Bauer, who was like Branson of today. He ended up a billionaire, did that man. He was a glass manufacturer, but he had a brilliant business mind. So he starts in Hunslet making glass for windows. Obviously, with the building boom, he was going to make money there. But glass bottles for everything from the brewery, bottled beer, right the way through to chemicals. You've got these people living in great style and great state in Hunslet. And when cholera hits, these people have a social responsibility to the poorer neighbours on the doorstep. And he's one of those that very generously gives away 4,000 portions of chloride of lime, these packets of stuff which people put in a glass bottle mixed with water. And it's almost like a bleach that he then tells them to wash all the areas with. The local ladies of Hunslet who are living in these fine houses, I mean, houses like Grove House, for example, it was almost like the mansion at Roundhay. That's how splendid it was. It had extensive grounds going round to a mill pond, which was the lake of theirs, where they had a boathouse and boating. They had summer houses, they had croquet lawns, they had stable blocks, laundries, their own brewery, these magnificent gardens. These ladies went and they started to make clothing. They started to have appeals to raise money for the poor. There was this great spirit of what is it that we can do to help and put an end to this cholera epidemic. So a great spirit of Hunslet. And I think one of the things that, having done this book, comes out that today there is a great spirit in Hunslet. The people there go out of their way to help and have so much pride in the place in which they were born.
Oh, definitely. I agree with that. And so these amazing mansions and sort of genteel places in Hunslet, when did they go missing? Was that to do with later development?
Well, yes, it was. The thing is that industry grows apace because it's almost as though people really begin to realise that the fuel is so cheap to drive these steam engines, and it's a major cost in production. So if you can get that energy costs today, I mean, look at us all. We're all suffering from the
Yeah.
huge hike in energy costs. Can you imagine if we had a supplier that was a third of the price that we're paying at the moment? It's that kind of factor that industrialists looked at and thought, crikey, isn't coal cheap there? It's one of our major costs. Let's build a factory there. So you get this huge boom. Now, what happens as you get more and more smoke and you're getting things like the cholera epidemic? Well, if you've money, do you want to be living in a place where the air is noxious, where the water in the river is now increasingly full of sewage effluent, where the noise of the factories, all these factors, is that the place that you want to live? And there's a great contrast between the early people like Pym Nevins, like Joshua Bower, who are so proud of their new mills. They live next door to them. Joshua Bower lived in what was known as the Glass Palace next to his work because it had so many wonderful glass windows with these open aspects. So, you ask what happened to the houses was, well, the rich began to realise, particularly after the 1849 cholera epidemic, where Hunslet was one of the worst places hit in the country. 1 in 40 of the people in Hunslet died of cholera at that time.
God.
Yeah, so this really rammed home. Hunslet might not be the place for you if you've got money. And many then, it's called the flight to the northern suburbs. Many of them go to places like Chapel Allerton, Potter Newton, Headingley, because they're on the plateau where the air and the wind, you don't get the factory smoke and you don't have polluted rivers on your doorstep. And as these people realize that the land that they're sitting on is so valuable now, these houses, that land from their gardens is worth a fortune for the building of a new factory. So one after the other, they begin to sell up and move north of the river away from pollution and the threat of disease.
And do you think that sort of separation, due to kind of health and things like that, but did that separation change the relationship between employers and employees?
I think what it did was you had so many rich people living in Hunslet in 1837 who all had a social conscience. And they passed by these houses of the poor, etc. And because they employed some of them, there was genuine feeling for them. These people had a Christian basis to their religion, and they felt a moral duty, a moral obligation to help. And many of them gave up literally not only the money, but more importantly, in many ways, their time and energy to make sure that the poor within their bounds were looked after. And workhouses have a dreadful stigma to them, and they also have a dreadful reputation. But ironically, Hunslet Workhouse had a reputation for being so much better than many of the others. And poor relief, kind of social services payments of the time, were always more generous in Hunslet because there was this genuine understanding that people didn't become poor because they wanted to. And one of the amusing things was that Hunslet people didn't tolerate the lazy. They really tried to name, blame and shame them. And one of the things that they didn't like were drunkards. And John Killingbeck got his dad to actually witness one of these shaming sessions. And he made a lovely little drawing, did his dad, who was a potter, an amateur artist, of the drunkard being shamed. And what they did was they went to his house when he was supposed to be at work and he was sleeping in with a hangover. They dragged him out of the house, they put him on a wheelbarrow, they chained him into the wheelbarrow so he couldn't move, and then they literally wheeled him around the streets with people hurling abuse and garbage and stuff at him, and then dumped him at his place of work. I mean, isn't that amazing? I just find that incredible. And, the illustration which features in my book, it's just so enchanting.
Yeah, what a different world. I'm pretty sure that doesn't happen in Hunslet these days.
I've been there many times and I've never seen anything like that. No, just nice people proud of their place.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned that Hunslet has lots of influential and famous visitors. Can you tell me a little bit about any of those?
Yeah, well, I think probably the most famous visitor of all came again to stay at Pim Nevin's house, and that was the future Tsar of Russia, Nicholas, who came, and he was, again, like any potential new leader, he needs to be aware of developments within the world and what is going to make a real impact and change. And because, as I mentioned earlier, Hunslet is like the Silicon Valley, the cutting edge of technology. He comes to stay as a guest of Pim Nevin's, and he brings a beautiful gift for Nevin's daughter. He then tours the factory with all its new spinning machinery in it. But another of the things which he wanted to see was the steam locomotive, which was working, bringing coal from the mines at Middleton across Hunslet and into Leeds. This had been designed by John Blenkinsop and manufactured by Matthew Murray at Holbeck. But in Hunslet, it crossed the path, and you got this fantastic view of this rack and pinion new steam revolutionary engine, the world's first commercially successful steam locomotive. And so, yeah, it was a wonder of the age. So you get everybody from him, and then later in the early 19th century, you get Neville Chamberlain coming to Hunslet and basically saying that Leeds Corporation face the largest challenge in terms of substandard houses of any other city in the country.
And is that
So
because it exploded so quickly?
it grew so quickly. It grew so quickly. And you had so many people crammed into such a small space. You know, thank goodness the corporation had bought Hunslet Moor, which was about the only place which was like a green lung where people could escape the smoke and smog of the area and go for a nice walk. And the corporation did a great job beautifying it, you know, creating a boating lake, lovely flower beds, etc. So they did the very best they could under those circumstances. But that black smog, I mean, one of the things that is interesting is, of course, Monday was always wash day. And that was because literally Hunslet shut on a Sunday so everybody could go to church and pray. And so all the steam engines were switched off. So on Sunday, all of a sudden, the sky's clear of soot. So if you wash on a Monday morning, you're not going to get all the specks of dust and soot all over your fresh washing. So it's so interesting that is the case. But there is the situation became so bad with people's health, a lot of problems with the lungs, etc., that in the 1920s, Leeds decides that it's got to do something about this, and they do an experiment whereby they plant lettuce seeds and cabbage seeds in different locations across the city. So they go everywhere from Garforth, which is at that time outside the city, to Headingley, where the lettuce and cabbages grow beautifully in the relatively soot-free atmosphere. And then you get these dreadfully small lettuce and cabbage in places like Armley and Hunslet. And the photographs they put, and they said, if this is what it's doing to our vegetables, what on earth is it doing to our lungs, and in particular, the lungs of our young children? And there's a great campaign then starts as early as the 20s to try and do something about smoke pollution in the city.
And did they manage to do anything?
Yeah, they did. I mean, what was great was, and again, you're getting leading people of Hunslet spearheading this change. So the Reverend of St Mary's Hunslet is going around speaking at things like the Leeds Luncheon Club, where the great and good dine, and all the time the profile of this problem is being raised and raised and raised, so that the great and good can't sit in isolation at Potter Newton, Chapel and Headingley, being unaware of the horrendous conditions that people are living in other parts of the city. And
Mm-hmm.
there is this great push, not only within the city, but nationally, for getting smokeless zones created. And after World War II, of course, in come these smokeless zones, and the air quality improves rapidly. But again, look at what we're doing. It's carbon monoxide poisoning from cars that's still an issue for us today. So there are so many comparable ways in which people then were trying to tackle the similar problems to the ones that we're doing today. But it should give us heart, because eventually they did crack the problem, just as now with carbon monoxide, we're getting electric cars that are bringing a solution to a problem that should have been solved long before.
Yeah, that is a nice way to look at it. That there are, there's lots of similarities, but even all that time ago, they recognised the problems and they made an effort to solve them.
Absolutely.
And in the 1800s, because your book concentrates on 1800 to 1850, was it all work for employees, or was there any sort of was there any entertainment? Did people go to theatres?
Well, they did. I mean, the thing is with the book, actually, though, it deals with Hunslet from earliest times right through to the present day. The lecture you heard was just a snippet out of the book.
See.
But the thing that I'd say to you, Hazel, is yes, entertainment was there. And actually, the front cover of the book is Hunslet Feast in 1850. And this was the great social occasion of the year. It was just one of those things which people so look forward to. We today, of course, are fortunate that we have annual leave. Well, what they had were holy days, so that you had the odd day off throughout the year. But the ones that the people looked forward to was the great Hunslet feast. And this took place in what today is Church Street, which is between the great steeple of Hunslet and Morrison's, which extends right the way down to Hunslet Road. And it took place early in August. And why it was so interesting was preparations started at the end of July, and they had what was called Liver and Whitewash Week, which was when people freshly whitewashed their walls, they scrubbed and polished the furniture, they burnished their metalwork around the fireplace to a high gloss, and Hunslet wives would only feed their family kind of liver, which was cheap, because they were saving up for the big week, the big feast, when often they would invite their relatives from other parts of Leeds to come and visit it. And the travellers came in, and they brought with them not only their wonderful roundabout rides, their swing boats, but there were Punch and Judy shows. There was O'Brien's, which was like adult entertainment. This was almost pantomime-like cheap playlets, which were a bit saucy and were full of double entendre, and so they were extremely popular. And what used to happen early in the day was a drummer would go around the streets of Hunslet banging on this drum and making such a loud noise to say that very shortly the feast would start, and then everybody in their finest clothes would come to that street, and there were all the stalls set up with things which, again, were rare and expensive for the working classes. Things like oranges, brandy snaps, toffee apples. There were toys for the children. This was a real festive treat. But the thing is with it, they're all there in their finery, enjoying the entertainment, eating things that they wouldn't have done. But of course, a great deal of drinking went on as well on this occasion.
Yeah.
Yes, and it was at that stage that there was a great deal of the morning after during that period, with mums and dads with rather thick heads.
But I bet it was worth it for that one brilliant day.
Yeah, it was. Yes, it was just the highlight of the year.
Is the history of Leeds something that you've always personally been interested in, Steve?
Yes, I was born in Kirkstall, And as a child, Kirk's Abbey and the Abbey House Museum were on my doorstep, and that's where I spent so much of my time. And during that early period, my feet weren't exactly perfect, very, very pincer-toed. And my dad was a great sportsman, and I couldn't do sport to save my life, but because I've got such loving parents, they used to take me to the Abbey, and at that time, the Thoresby Society were undertaking archaeological excavations within the grounds, and they very kindly did those diggers allow me to join them, those excavators. And it was at that very young age that I got this absolute passion for the history of the city, which has simply grown since then. And ironically, many years later, I became president of the Thoresby Society. So doesn't that just show you
It
that
does.
childhood is so important for you? It impacts so greatly on what you love.
And did you ever, has history been part of your career, Steve, or has it always been something that you do outside of work?
No, I've been so lucky in my life. For many years, I was a primary school teacher and absolutely loved that job, and that enabled me to do a lot of local history there with the children. But then I had a very lucky break. In the evenings, I used to lecture on the history of Leeds and run night school classes on it. And one of the lectures I was doing was on a man called Charles Turner Thackeray, who was a Leeds doctor, who was the father of occupational medicine. And very early on, he realized that certain working environments could really impact on your health. So if you're a miller, you get lung disease, etc. Well, I was giving this lecture at the university, and in the audience was a gentleman who was helping to set up Thackeray Medical Museum. And at the end of my lecture, he said, "Oh, are you a teacher as well?" I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "Oh, would you like to come for an interview on Monday? We're setting up this museum." So I was then employed to recreate the streets of Leeds in 1842. So I had nearly 3 years doing my hobby. How lucky is that?
It really
And
is.
it was fantastic. And then I managed to get a job as teacher advisor for history with Leeds Advisory Inspection Services, and from there, area manager for south of Leeds. And that's why I really grew to love Hunslet, because when I came to work there as part of the school improvement team, you all of a sudden there were all these buildings which I thought, I don't know anything about the history of Scots Arms houses. I don't know the history of Hunslet Church, and it's that impetus, and also the welcoming people of South Leeds. They were just so warm and friendly. And then I ended my career as museum director of the Royal Armouries. So what a joyous, joyous career I had.
Yeah, and how great to be able to have something that you're so passionate and interested in, and be able to make that your job.
Ah, how few people get that privilege. Really is. I so value it. It's wonderful.
And so, for the remarkable story of Hunslet, for people who are listening, how can they get hold of a copy?
Yeah. Well, Stephenson's Wallpaper Shop is the local outlet for that on Hunslet Road. And Janine Steele was so helpful to me because she told me the history of their shop, which has been serving people of Hunslet since 1882.
Wow.
And the archive of her family was fantastic. And in the book, there are some wonderful photographs of the shop through the ages, but also the people who served there. So you can get it from there. If you're in town, the Leeds Library on Commercial Street, they stock it. But if you want to order online, you can get that via Leeds Civic Trust website.
Brilliant. I'll put lots of links in the podcast notes.
That's great. And the book, I was very fortunate to have very generous financial support. So the book actually only retails at £20 for a 352-page full colour hardback. And it's £20, but if you buy it online, it's £5 postage.
Yeah. That's brilliant. And are you having a rest after writing that book, or have you already got in your head what you want to write about next?
Oh no rest for the wicked. I'm currently working with Frida Matthews on a history of Little Woodhouse, with Robert Dyson on a history of Mabgate, and with Dr. Rachel Unsworth on the history of Chapel Allerton. And all those projects are coming along very nicely as we speak. So no, it's just an endless fascination with the history of this city.
And that's good for everybody because we'll get to read those amazing books. That's great. Steve, I always ask my guests 3 questions. The first one being, what would you say is great about the city of Leeds?
The great thing about this city of Leeds are the people. There's no two ways about that. And it's almost the can-do mentality, which I love about this place. This book came about because people were willing to do things with no monetary reward at all. They just wanted things to happen. I've travelled extensively, and it's that friendship, that warmth, that belonging, which I feel is so important. And the other thing is the open spaces. I think Leeds is blessed with such wonderful parks and countryside, and again, great people maintaining those. Everything from the council staff who do such a wonderful job, but also to the Friends of organisation, people who volunteer to give up their time to make Leeds a more beautiful place. So again, these green lungs that pepper the city, how great is that?
Yeah, really great. And I mean, I really benefit because I live in Beeston and right next to Crosslots Park, which was just a godsend during, when we were all locked in and we could go for one walk a day. And, to be able to live in an inner city, but also live near such a beautiful green space that is so well used. And like you say, the Friends of Crosslots Park, it was a no-go area for quite a long time, I think, in the 1980s. And yet this group got together. And it's just a pleasure to be in there and to see how many different people there are from Beeston using the park for all sorts of different purposes. Yeah, we are very, very lucky in that regard. And if you had to choose something, Steve, that you think is not so great about the city, what would you choose?
Traffic and public transport.
You'd be amazed how often I hear that.
It really is. And one of the great sadnesses to me is that there were plans for a Leeds Underground system, and you can still see those plans with the main underground station in City Square, and you just think, what a lost opportunity was that?
Yeah, I hear a lot of people talk about that. Do you know why did that never come to fruition?
Cost.
Right.
You're always dealing in that first half of the 20th century with a real attitude of, oh, that's too much brass. Whereas you get in the Victorian period, these incredible buildings like Leeds Town Hall, like the Corn Exchange, they are such wonderful buildings. And then the Edwardian period, you've got Leeds Kirkgate Market, you've got the County Arcade. These are just jewels. But they were unpopular at the time because they cost a fortune. But there was almost an overriding desire that this city was going to stand out. And then you get, this sounds really, it's called the rise of the shopocracy. But the councillors stopped being people who have vision and are willing to be unpopular, to then these populist councillors who were always trying to keep the rates low, and what they wouldn't do was in any way gamble anything. They just wanted the rates to be as low as they possibly could.
Right.
And that's why you don't get the underground being built, because it's too much brass, lad. We can't afford that in Leeds. Oh, no. And yet, if they'd bitten that bullet, how wonderful would it have been? And then other people say, well, of course, the costs were high because the geology of Leeds made it more problematic. You have too many fractures in the substructure. But nevertheless, You ask what I find frustrating. I find travelling around Leeds frustrating because if you're going to a meeting with people, sometimes you sail through traffic, there's no problem at all, and then another day you're just like yesterday. I was just stuck in traffic for ages trying to get across from Horsforth to Hunslet. It's just a nightmare.
It really is, and it's such a shame about the underground system because I feel like one of the problems with Leeds is, there's lots of lovely little distinct areas that are part of Leeds, but we feel very separate. So, for example, Farsley, it shouldn't take me that long. I use the bus system, which doesn't help. But to get to Farsley, it took me over an hour to get there by bus, which is ridiculous when you see where it is on a map compared to where I am. And I do find that really frustrating. And I feel like if we'd have had that underground system, perhaps we could have all felt a little bit more connected and you could get much more easily from one small place to another.
I think that's absolutely true. And one of the sadnesses is that in 1950, Leeds City Transport, run by Leeds City Council, was the most efficient public transport system outside London.
Wow.
How can you go in over half a century from being the most efficient outside London to being the most inefficient public transport system in Europe?
Is that true?
That is true. That's true. It has none of the tram systems or kind of effective bus systems. And I mean, what's great at the moment, of course, is that we are beginning to turn that corner. You have things like the new park and ride schemes at Elland Road and at Sturton with the electric bus systems and out near Temple Newsham House. So those cheap park and ride systems are beginning to challenge infrastructure issues.
Yeah.
But, try getting through Headingley at peak traffic time or Kirkstall Road. It's a nightmare. It really is.
It really is. And like, I mean, because I work less in town now since the pandemic, so I'm only at work, in work a couple of days a week, maybe one day a week sometimes. But whenever I'm at a bus stop anywhere in town, there's always like a scrolling thing. Please beware, the buses may be delayed because traffic's so bad. And I just think, but this is constant. It's not like, it's not like at certain points of the day or certain points of the week, certain points of the year. It's literally every single day.
It is indeed. We share the frustration.
We really do. And honestly, I think I've done 141 episodes I've published now.
Wow.
And honestly, the percentage of people who that is their bugbear, about the bus system or about the traffic or the road system, I would say it must be 90% of people, that's what they say. And so if somebody had been a resident of Leeds for a very long time, would you be able to tell them of something that you would consider to be a hidden gem that they might never have heard of?
What a fascinating question is that. The thing that I'd say is the hidden gem of Leeds is the Thoresby Society, which is based at the Leeds Library on Commercial Street. Because if you're interested in the history of Leeds, the Leeds Library on Commercial Street is one of the most beautiful buildings inside, but contained within it are some amazing collections of watercolour paintings of Leeds that people haven't seen, lantern slides, photographs, huge raft of archival material, everything from people's diaries from across the city, across time, right the way through to the most fantastic collection of historic maps, sail plans, and that is a hidden gem. We're always encouraging people to come and look at our collections. We're part of Heritage Open Days. But it doesn't matter where you live within the city, from Horsforth to Temple Newsham, from Beeston, where you are, which we've got some fantastic photographs of Stankhall Barn, for example, and the wonderful house that was at the side of that, sadly, of course, burnt some years ago. But right the way across to Rothwell, the wealth of the material that we hold is just stunning. I mean, you'll get a flavour of it if you go on the Thoresby Society's website, but it is the richness of those collections, which are growing all the time. Recently, we had the great historian Don Cole's collection of material on Cookridge, Arvington, Eckup and Addle added to the collection. 2 years ago, thanks to Leeds Parks, we were given the former Farnley Historical Society material with incredible photographs and maps and plans of Farnley, Leeds. So, yeah, that's my hidden gem.
It is an absolutely beautiful place. It's my dream to one day I will subscribe to it. At the moment, I'm having to be careful with pennies, but that's on my list. That's like my top. That would be my ultimate thing if I had a subscription to that library, because I first went to it, like you said, through Heritage Open Days, and it's just wonderful. I mean, if you're into books and you're into beautiful buildings and history, there's just not a better place you could go. It's been absolutely wonderful speaking to you today, Steve. I'll make sure I put lots of links that people can buy The Remarkable Story of Hunslet. And what will you be doing with the rest of your day today?
It's my wife's birthday tomorrow, so I'm going to be shopping and keeping in the good books.
Now that sounds like a really good plan. A good plan, that. Thank you so much for coming to speak to me. And yeah, good luck with it. And I can't wait to hear all of the other projects that you're working on.
Thank you so much, Hazel, for your time too and giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Wow, what a fantastic guest Steve Burt was. Steve didn't have a song that he wanted to feature, and I thought one by someone from Hunslet or that mentions Hunslet would be a great fit. I put a shout out on Twitter, and my brilliant friend Faye Dawson said that Mick Artistik's Ego Trip was bound to have one. He did. He and his team kindly sent it to me, and lo, you get to hear the wonderful track Stars. Listen out for Hunslet being mentioned, Leeds, and I'll speak to you soon.
I look up to the sky and I see the stars, and they make me want to cry. A million little lights, a million trillion miles away, and the night is blue and cold, and I'm falling for the stars. I remember I'm a little boy of 7, and I get a torch for Christmas, and I shine my brand new shiny little torch into the sky, and I want to hit the stars. And the 3 wise men were searching for the light, they were looking for the star,